Okay, record. Here we go. All right, here we go. A brief history of typefaces. We've already talked where we left off is the invention of printing. Ellen Lupton is who I'm using for this lecture, the book Thinking with Type. And I have that book right here. This is the book that this is based on, Thinking with Type. And she wrote in here, for me, discovering typography was like finding the bridge that connects art and language. Designers most commonly tap vast libraries of typefaces. Designers like choosing and combining, knowing how and why letter forms evolved, helps to communicate typographically with wit and wisdom. So we're looking at the movable type that was invented by Johann Gutenberg in the 15th century, Germany. This typography took cues from the dark, dense handwriting of the period called blackletter. This is what movable type looks like. It's each individual letter is put onto a block of wood, and then they're put in these storage drawers. So these are traditional font cases is what they're called. One is for majuscules, which are the uppercase letters. And that's where the term uppercase comes from, because the majuscules were stored in the uppercase in the typesetter's cabinet. The term minuscules yielded the term lowercase because it was set in the lowercase in the cabinet. So we actually get the terminology uppercase and lowercase letters from these cases that used to hold the letters for movable type. The majuscules were in uppercase, the minuscules were in lower cases. And so those two terms, majuscules and minuscules, have gone away. And everyone, we all now know we refer to them as uppercase letters and lowercase letters. And it's based on these cases. The very bottom one in this example is called the California job case. And that's where they actually had them sitting side by side. So you could fit a lot less letters in there. So you would do smaller projects. So they were sitting side by side. But traditionally, the uppers were all in one case and the lowers were all in one case. And they were called uppercase, lowercase from this. So that's kind of a fun fact. That's where it comes from. So moving on. Humanist type. Working in Venice, the Italians rejected those Gothic scripts. You know, they were looking at what Johann was doing here and was like, no, we can do better. So they wanted it to be more humanistic. They combined Gothic calligraphy with handwriting. They wanted it to feel like more like you would draw it. They didn't want it to feel so dense and difficult to read. So they looked at a more open typeface, something a little easier to read. You can see how much more legible this was in 1490. This is Jensen's Roman typeface. And here it is in Adobe. Today, we can still get Adobe Jensen. Remember, this was designed in 1470. We are still using it today. It's very popular. So Robert Slimbach styled Adobe Jensen after Nicholas Jensen's Roman typefaces, and the italics of Ludovico degli Aragai, created in 15th century Italy. That doesn't look a day over 500, does it? So here it is, the Adobe version that you can get on your Adobe fonts and the original inspiration for this typeface. The Venetian publisher Aldus Manutius distributed inexpensive small format books, and he used italic letters modeled on casual handwriting style basically like as if he was writing it, because the idea here is paper was expensive. Papyrus is what they were using. These were small little books. They wanted to sell as many as possible. The key was how many words can we get on a page? They wanted it to make it as cost effective as possible. So you could get more words on a page if they were using this italic typeface. So this italic typeface, which was introduced in the 15th century, saved time and calligraphy space and printing. You also used less paper. So it was just much more affordable. And that's what was the impetus for creating italic typeface. Here's an example of looking at integrated upper and lowercase typefaces. Jensen's Roman and italic type. You can kind of see a little example here of the Roman, and then it moves into italic, and then back to Roman. You can also see some interesting things here. How many of you have heard the term ligature? Has anyone heard that term before? Rachel? Okay, good. Rain? Awesome. Do either of you know what that means? What it means, ligature?
Aren't they like two letters, like et, like et, that means like and, like et al. And then I know there is like an fi. They kind of like they're smushed together. Is that what it is?
Do you see some in this example? Do you see some ligatures? Who can find them?
Oh yeah, there's on the fourth line, the first whatever that combination of letters.
I think it's FT. And there's two in that line. Do you see the two? Do you see the second one?
Oh yeah, there's another FT a little later in the word that starts with D.
That's right. And do you see another one? There's one more yet. Or there's actually, sorry, two more.
The L's in line 8, first word.
7, 8. Yep, the two L's are attached. Right above it, though, what's this one right here above it?
T.
The F and the T and the italic. The F and the T, you have the two
next to each other, usually in words.
What did you say?
Is it because they're commonly next to each other in words?
Yes. Exactly. That's exactly why. So they design ligatures for words, for letters that are commonly next to each other. So you're going to see here, there's one in the second sentence. Who sees the one in the second sentence? That's the really common one.
Fi.
That's right. Fi, very common. The finial of the F becomes the tittle of the I. And so that's a real common one as well. So yeah, this one has quite a few. There's the F and I. I think this gives me a new little device where I can highlight, and I think I can like use a pointer, a spotlight. Yes. Oh, it's not letting me do that without setting up a system thing. Okay, forget it. Okay. Well, let me do that. Oh yeah, the F and I. Can you guys see that when I draw on it then? Are you seeing it?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay.
Get the U
Anyway.
and the F in that line right above it. That one you just did. There's a U and the S in the first
Oh,
one.
right here. This one?
Yeah, that one, and then in the
Well,
first.
it is connected. You're right. They are connected. Yeah. All right. Well, it is actually, the difference here is here, actually, I'm going to take it back. These are connected, which isn't a ligature. A ligature means one part of the word creates the next part of the word. So the F connects directly into that T. The F creates the I of the dot of the I, the L and the T. But I think I don't know that I wouldn't necessarily call the U and the S, they're connected, but I wouldn't call them ligatures. Although it is coming up to the top, which is a little unusual. You know what? I'm not 100% sure if we would call that a ligature. I'm not feeling it, but maybe.
That's fine.
But you know what? I think we would call it a ligature because that has to be a special character because the S, that line is going all the way through the S. So we would have to use our glyphs palette. So the way we get to ligatures, and we'll talk about this later when we get into it, but are using the glyphs palette. They're actually a single letter that has both of those characters on it. So if we were still printing with wood blocks, we would have one block of wood with both characters on it because they're connected, right? So you'd have that F and I in one block. The U and the S would be on one block, so on and so forth. Good. All right. Onward. Oh, now it just keeps them there though, doesn't it? How do I clear all drawings? Okay, there we go. I'm like, oh no, they're going to stay. So I lost my notes. Okay, here we go. So here's some examples of Jensen on a publication. So here it is on a book cover. See it in action. This 500-year-old typeface. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind is we're looking at typefaces. Here's another one, Garamond. Garamond was designed, it's based on Renaissance designs by Claude Garamond in the 16th century. So here's an example of 3 different type foundries. Excuse me. 3 different type foundries that have drawn a digital version. So the first one happened in 1976. ITC, the type foundry ITC, created Garamond. And the first example you can see at the top row. The second one happened 10 years later in Adobe created one. And Adobe created Adobe Garamond. And the things they've done is they added an italic and they incorporated lining and old style numbers. The first one only had lining numbers and no italic. And then the third one, Garamond Premier Regular, was designed in 2005. And what I want to ask you is, what do you see different? They're all Garamond, but are they all the same? Or are you seeing differences? Just go, you can go ahead and just turn your mic on, or you can raise your hand if you see it.
The 1976 seems, my description is it seems fatter.
Right, it is fatter. And that term we use is bold. It feels very bold. And the reality is it's not a bold face, it's a regular face, but yeah, it's heavier. The stroke weight is heavier, quite a bit heavier. And if I didn't know better, I would think, oh, that's a bold, but it's not. It's the regular. But yeah, it wasn't as refined, we'll say, as the next two.
The difference between the bottom and the top, right when you're ready to put the, I say the belly, or just the first stroke of the D, the one that goes
Of the
up
D.
the first
Yeah.
stroke, no, this right next to it. It's like this stroke is longer than the other one, and then the little O is, how can you say, this is difference. I see the difference. It's a slight difference.
So when you're looking at the D, right? We're looking at both Ds, and you're looking at this. I think you're calling it the belly, which I like. It's actually called the bowl, but belly's good too. I might want to use belly over bowl. It's kind of funny. And you're right, they are different. Look at the difference in the thick to thin, where the stroke of the bowl of the D meets the stem, and it definitely has a difference. The other thing that we can look at that are different is things like the finial at the bottom of the Y. Do you see how different they are in all 3?
Mhm.
Each one of them is different. I'm gonna look on the chat. I see some,
Oh,
there's a
that's
little
fine.
more kerning in the uppercase letters than in the second one. Yes, that is a good point. The other thing I forgot to mention that is here is you notice that here is what we call small caps. So both the Adobe Garamond and the Garamond Premiere include small caps and italic. And the first one, of course, has neither. These are called lining numbers, and these are called old style numbers. They're giving you both choices. Lining numbers behave like capital letters, and old style numbers behave like lowercase letters. What else do we see that's different? Rachel.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, what's the reason for lowercase numbers? Or whatever you call them.
For old style numbers,
Yeah. Why are they there?
why are they there? They're there because when you're doing a document, think about documents that have a lot of numbers. So for example, a restaurant, a menu, right? A menu has lots of numbers, prices. You also might be looking at a financial document that, like an annual report that has all of the earnings reports, lots of numbers. Sometimes you want your numbers to stand out like a capital letter. So like when you have all numbers, like when you put all your type in capital letters, it can feel like you're shouting. It can feel really big and bold when you do that with numbers as well. If you want your numbers to blend into the paragraph and not stick out so much, that the old style numbers that act like lowercase letters blend in better. They don't feel like they're sticking out so much. Sometimes you want them to stick out, sometimes you don't.
Okay.
I see Michaela's question, is there a vocabulary list for this? Absolutely. We're going to be learning all of the terminology I'm starting to introduce you to. You're hearing me say it. We're all going to be talking like this by the end of the semester. We're going to be learning the anatomy of the letter forms, and we're going to be learning all of these terms throughout the semester. So yeah, we're going to learn vocabulary. Each week, we're going to learn lots of terminology. There is one thing, the foundation. I just saw this in a video recently. There's what was the most important thing you should learn as a graphic designer? Like, what's the most important thing? And they asked these designers, and they're like, number one thing is typography. It is the foundation of design, and it has the most terminology and things to learn about to understand where we're going with it. So yes, I'm using that language for you right now, so you kind of get used to it, and we're gonna keep talking about it. The reason I bring all of this up is to show you that in Typefaces, you can't just say to someone, I'm going to use Garamond, because these three are all Garamond. So you always have to be very specific when you're speccing a typeface. This typeface is over 500 years old. Its inspiration, I should say, is over 500 years old. It's been designed over the last 50 years. These are just three examples. There's many more. So we have to make sure that we're very specific in using the foundry name, whether it's ITC or Adobe or another, and there's many. And so you can't just use the part of the word, which is Garamond, which would be like the generic word. You have to be very specific, incorporating the foundry. Okay, so that's just kind of a make sure we're always incorporating the whole thing. Okay, so there you go. I'm going to keep going. Although I'm in the drawing tool yet, I think I got to turn off the drawing tool. Okay. Here is an example of Adobe Garamond in use. All right, we're going to move into the age of enlightenment and abstraction. The French designer and typographer Geoffrey Torrey in 1529 did a series of diagrams. the anatomy of, in his anatomy, he tried to use the idea of the modesty and chastity are required before all else. And so he tried to kind of make this kind of an anatomy of the body, anatomy of the typeface and of the letter forms kind of connected in some way. He kind of was in a very kind of quasi scientific approach to designing letter forms. And so he was looking at the human body, and then these engravings by Louis Somenu is from the Alphabet Commission by Louis the, what is this, 14th in 1693. The engravings were the basis of a royal typeface designed by Philippe Grandjean. And so here we kind of get even more technical with our drawings, less humanistic, more scientific in this example. So this was 14th century France. And then we're looking at the engraving reproductions of penmanship. So the sharpness influenced new type styles, which were creating like these sharp, influenced new crisp letter forms with high contrast. Here's an example of William Caslon in the 1720s, influenced by flexible steel pen and quill. So the design was basically drawn out with a flexible steel pen and a quill to kind of get these very thin weight changes from a thick stroke to a thin stroke in this high contrast of thick to thin. The serifs are very thin, the cross strokes are very thin, and the stems are very thick. Here's an example of Caslon in a more contemporary setting. So John Baskerville in 1750 and through the 60s, he sought to surpass Caslon. You know, they were all in competition with each other. They wanted people to come to their print shop. So each print shop had their own typefaces. And so here we are in England, and he wanted to explore that thick to thin contrast even more. He wanted to make it more extreme. And his contemporaries, the people that were also kind of competing for the job, for the work, for the business, were starting accusing him of blinding people. He said, "You're blinding all the readers of the nation, for the strokes of her letters are being too thin and narrow, and they're hurting people's eyes." This, of course, was not the most contrasting typeface, but it was more the person who here's, oh, I'm sorry, here's one more of Baskerville. You can see it on the page. Looks pretty contemporary, right? Well, we still use Baskerville today. We use different typefaces influenced by Baskerville today. Here is a little closer. What does that remind you of?
Times.
Little bit, little bit. Here's an example of a book cover using Baskerville. Well, working in the media of engraving and the flexible steel pen, 18th century writing masters such as George Bickham created lavishly curved scripts as well as finely detailed Roman capitals, still with that very, very high contrast. And these alphabets were all designed and influenced of Baskerville, and we move into Gabbanista Bodini in Bodoni, in Italy, and I'm going into Didot first, and then so Didot was in France, Bodoni was in Italy, and they were both creating totally vertical accesses, meaning very straight up and down, severe extreme contrast, and razor thin serifs to really kind of push that modernist aesthetic even further. Rachel, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
If you go back a page, there was a letter between the lowercase r and, or a couple pages, yeah, there were between R and S. What
A
letter,
ligature?
is that just what that is? Was a ligature part of the alphabet? Go one more page when it was showing the
Oops.
whole alphabet. And the lowercase, when it goes PQR, whatever that is.
Oh, R and S. Yeah, that
No,
would
no,
be a
no,
ligature.
the Roman print. What
R,
letter is
F.
between R and S?
Roman prince.
No,
Oh, I see it. There's an R and then there's an F and then an S. With
that's
an
not
F
part of
without a crossbar. Right, it's an
Yeah.
F without a crossbar. That's not a ligature. And you know what? You know what? I'm so glad you pointed that out. I haven't caught that before. I'm not sure why there is an F there without the crossbar.
Is that another letter that they have that is no longer part of our alphabet?
That could very well be. That's a good eye, Rachel. I'm not quite sure why there was an F there without the crossbar. Because it's not the T and it's not an R. So I'm not sure what that's doing there.
Also
That's
only in lowercase and not in the uppercase.
yeah, it's not in the uppercase. Yeah, because it's not over here. So interesting. Good eye. Good eye. I don't know. That's so funny. All right, so we talked about, oh, here's Bedoni's. I thought I skipped it. Okay, so here's Bedoni. So we went to Dido. Okay, so we have Dido. Now, here's my question for you. Look at this. This is Dido. This is Bedoni. What contemporary brands use Dido and or Bedoni today? Any ideas? Think about it. What brands? These are big, big brands.
Dior.
Dior, correct. Keep going. There's more in that
Chanel.
same category. Which one?
Chanel.
Chanel. Keep going.
Valentino.
I have to look at Valentino offhand. I don't know if it is. It
Maxim?
probably is.
Is Maxim part of it?
Which
No.
one?
Maxim, what is this Maxim?
I'd have to look at Maxim. It's think of Vogue, Calvin
Yeah.
Klein, Dior, Chanel, fashion, high fashion. Still to this day uses either Bedoni or Dido. These are used in high fashion still today. So these are like, you'll see them all the time. So these are, designed in 1788 and still being used in high fashion today. Oh, Rain, you did some research for us. The long S as the middle S or initial S is an archaic form of the lowercase s. Thank you. Thank you, Rain. Kind of helped us figure out that mystery. I appreciate it. You guys are so great. I love that. I love it when you do the deep dive for me. There it is. There's Vogue. There's CK. Okay, last chapter here. We're going to be going into monster fonts. Any idea what could possibly be monster fonts? We've talked about fashion fonts. Now we're going into monster fonts. And no, I don't mean Lady Gaga's monsters. Here we are. So the rise of advertising. We're talking about the turn of the century, not the century we just had, but the Industrial Revolution, the rise of advertising in the 19th century. We finally had a point when we needed to package goods. Up until this point, up until the Industrial Revolution, when you needed flour or sugar or salt, you would bring your own little sacks, your little burlap sacks to your local grocer, and you would have them fill them. They would fill the bag of flour, they'd fill the bag of salt, they'd fill the bag of sugar. You would get your eggs from in a basket. Nothing was in a package, right? Everything was the ingredients for you to make whatever you needed. So it wasn't until people started moving to the cities and having to work in factories did we have a need to package goods, because people were no longer living where the food was being grown and where it was available. So we have to start making choices, and brands started involving because they had to compete against each other. All of a sudden you had multiple choices for the first time ever of cornstarch, of your flour, the gold medal, the gold medal flour, or was it going to be King Arthur's flour? Like, what flour were you going to buy? What milk were you going to buy? What sugar were you going to buy? Everything was now packaged, and you were no longer bringing your packaging in, and they were given to you in packages. So that is where kind of our industry began. That's why we began branding and creating logos and designing, is because of the need to package goods. So mass consumption. So the first thing is looking at advertising. They had to tell people that this is what your choices were. So all of a sudden we had these big signs going up on buildings, and we needed large scale letters. And so what we did is started to take the design of the letters we had and started like supersizing them. Excuse me. We would make them inflated hyperbold styles, or fat faces, if you will. And these were developed in the early 19th century. This is Bodoni, but on steroids. If we think about the Bodoni, we just saw the CK logo. This isn't that Bodoni. This is like this chubby and bold and extended version of it. Still very cool. And I think this kind of style, if you look at our trends right now in typography, this style is coming back big time right now. This is all the rage when I look at Instagram. Here we have extra condensed typefaces. So they're really long and tall so they can be seen from far away. This wasn't done until we needed to advertise. So the idea of big, tall typefaces that get your attention from down the street. These would be too big to be built in metal, because remember, they were little metal blocks of type on attached to wooden blocks. So what these were was actually carved into wood. So these big, and these would be like 3 or 4 feet high, wood panels that were carved. The letter forms were carved in so they can be printed and print banners and billboards. And lead would have been too soft and too heavy. No one could lift it. So it had to do something that would handle the pressure of printing, but also be able to be maneuvered by the printers. They couldn't be thousands of pounds. These were, they had to be something that people could actually move around and utilize. Here, another thing they were doing is making the serifs on letters big and thick and heavy, so that they became load bearing. And this idea of really, again, pay attention to me. They're big and they're bold, and you can see them from far away. The other big thing that started happening was serifs were not only just getting big and beefy, they were also getting very decorative. So they were making them in interesting angles, and they were having swirly cues put on them. And, they were just becoming this decorative element. Think of old circus posters, right? This is where it was really evident that they were used for decorative, kind of extra flourish circus posters for sure of the day. This is an 1875 advertising poster with everything centers aligned, over a dozen typefaces, and it's definitely like nothing we would want to do today, but it is something that's kind of showing the kind of pay attention to me, pay attention to me. The one thing that's helping us be able to read it is that they did keep it center aligned. So it's really a static layout, even though there's so many typefaces on here to look at. Okay, so after all of that kind of commercialization of type and advertising and packaging, you had a group of designers that were kind of rebelling against that. They didn't want to be part of that. They didn't want to be like sellouts working for commercial. They wanted to be pure and artistic and really think of it as an art form. And there was the Dada movement. The Dada posters used a variety of typefaces and advertising cuts. You can see there's little like illustrations in here too. These were called advertising cuts. They were little also made on blocks of wood, like wood print, and you could add them into designs. This was fighting against the grid. And so because this was all done on a press with these square wooden blocks, they literally had to cut pieces of wood and on veneer on angles and screw them in and to put the type on these curves. This was not like a computer design. This was like physically super difficult to do a poster like this using the technology of the day, which was a letterpress printing press and movable type. So this curve on here, so hard to do. The angles, also very hard. They had to wedge pieces of wood and things in there to kind of make it sit on these weird angles. So this poster here was really difficult. And this was done in 1923. So again, no computer here. This was all done by hand using movable type and dingbats and all the other elements. So after you kind of get through all of that, you got to move into this form and revolution. Edward Johnston created this chart of the essential characters of Roman inscriptions in 1906. It's the search for an essential standard alphabet. He was reacting against the monstrosities of the Industrial Revolution. He wanted nothing to do with it. He wanted to bring the romance back. He wanted to go back to the medieval times and bring back the romance of type. I think he would be a big fan of the Ren Fair. So we had golden type, which was created by the English design reformer William Morris. You might have heard of William Morris because he's done many things. How many of you have heard William Morris, maybe from your art history classes? Yeah. Rachel, you've heard of him? Excellent.
With wallpaper, right? Or like wallpaper inspired by him?
Yes, wallpaper for sure. William Morris was in the arts and crafts movement. He did wallpaper, he did furniture, he worked with Tiffany and did lighting. He did fabrics, textiles. He did typefaces. This is his typeface. He was definitely what we would call a Renaissance man. He did it all. He was involved in all the arts. And he was really critical of industrial revolution. He did not want everything mass produced. He saw ugliness in 19th century commercial printing. He was not a fan. So he designed Golden based on Nicholas Jensen, back to Nicholas Jensen. So he kind of took a lot of inspiration from Jensen, some might say copied, and moved into his typeface of Golden. And then there is the Nicholas Jensen's typeface used today. So you can kind of see the similarities and kind of get a feel for it. Okay, moving on. More avant-garde behavior. So this is a logo for the Dutch avant-garde journal De Stil. De Stil is another design movement in the early 1900s, 1917 to the 1920s. And it's very pixel-like blocks. When I look at the De Stil movement, these two examples to me look like something that could have been done today. They could look like they could be for a video game. How many of you think this looks very contemporary? These were done in 1917 and 1919. Do they feel like pixel-based, digital, kind of inspired? Yeah. So, I mean, it's something that, what goes around and comes around, learning this history and kind of seeing these things, like this has been around a long time. And we've come back to this look a lot, especially in the 80s. Okay, here's Herbert Bayer, who designed Universal, consisting of only lowercase letters. Who can tell me and this was done in 1925, what major brand marketed to young people uses this typeface? Nope, it's not Crocs. Although I can see why you say that. I think there's some familiarity, but there's one that's spot on. Nope, not Uniqlo. There you go. Candy, ding, 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 ding. Candy's the winner. Beats. The B in Beats is really unaltered in any way. It's exactly this B from this typeface is the logo for Beats. All right, moving on. Futura. Designed by Paul Renner in Germany in 1927, Futura is practical and subtle font that remains widely used today. Who can tell me what brand uses Futura? And there are multiple, but I feel like there's one that you especially is kind of is marketed to the youth market. And I'll give you a hint, it's fashion based. Anyone? Any fans of Supreme? No? All right, moving on. The Dutch designer Wim Krall published designs for a new alphabet consisting of no diagonals or curves in 1967. The reason he did that is because everything was turning digital. We got our first computers in the 1960s, late 1960s. They were taking up full rooms. The bitmapped printers, the displays, everything had to be vertical and horizontal. Bitmap printing and bitmap displays could not handle diagonals. So his solution for that is we're going to need a new alphabet. We're going to have to get rid of diagonals. This new technology can't handle diagonals. Well, we can't use the alphabet we have. We're going to need a new alphabet that doesn't have diagonals. So this is what he came up with. We'll see if you can read it. Can you read it? I'll give you a hint. The headline is New Alphabet is the headline.
It
And
almost
down here,
it almost reminds me of like when you see words where you know what the first letter and the last letter are, and then all of the other letters are jumbled up and you're still somehow kind of able to read it. It almost reminds me of it says an introduction for a programmed typography, and I'm like, how can I understand that?
you did, you got it. Perfect. Excellent. Yeah, it's tricky. But obviously that was really well, here's an example of someone who's like, okay, we're not going to get rid of the diagonals. This is Susanna Litko for Emigre Type Foundry in 1985 came up with the low res family. And so here's her solution to dealing with bitmap postscript, non-postscript type. So our printers at the time were all 8-bit. Think of old video games. They're all 8-bit. This is what screens look like. And so this is some different typefaces she came up with to deal with the issue of bitmapping diagonals. So lots of choices. Now everyone's all gooey and nostalgic for this. So the French designer Philippe Apollogue created this contemporary versions on reduced geometric typefaces. So lots of people were looking at not only for the reason of the computer, which the last two examples were, this is now just looking at how can we get a more minimal typeface, looking at more modular systems for design's sake, just to be unique, to be interesting. All right. I'm going to pause here. Oh. Check the time. Oh, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go two more. I think we have 2 more minutes. We're pretty close to the end. I think I'm gonna finish. Then we'll be done. Type as narrative. We'll finish this up. 1990. We've got out of the 80s, the bitmap. We got PostScript. PostScript was invented. Hallelujah. PostScript was invented. We don't have to do bitmap printing anymore. We don't have to look at bitmap anymore. We now can print beautiful type again. We get our diagonals back. However, it's the 90s. What was happening in the 90s? Who remembers? Anyone knows what was the design style, the fashion style? What was happening? Grunge, Nirvana. Anyone remember? Everything was about being
Gotcha.
messy, not perfect. It was, go ahead. What were you saying, Raul?
No. Yeah, just the culture was not in tune. I mean, it's no whole new culture put it down.
It was a counterculture, right? It was like fighting against perfectionism. We don't want to be all prim and proper. We're gonna, we're not gonna dress up. We're gonna be casual. We're gonna be ourselves. We're gonna listen to the music we want to listen to. We're going to design was being really irreverent. And so this is an example of not the typeface design. Look at the design. It's uncomfortable. It's irregular. They were using, this example was using the plastic stencil. It refers to like a manual version, like what we would have done as kids, tracing letters on a stencil and then turning it into a typeface. Here's another one, Dead History. Scott McCalla created this typeface in the 1990s, basically cutting letters in half and smashing them together. Here you have a serif typeface on the left and a sans serif rounded typeface on the right. He literally just like cut through them, smashed them together, and boom, here's your new typeface. So it's 100% digital work. Designers had computers. They were figuring out how to make things with computers. They were designing type with computers for the first time. So this is what we were getting. We were getting kind of crazy stuff because everything was digital. Everything was digital. But it wasn't all craziness. There was a lot of beautiful designs that came out in the 90s as well. One of my favorites, and this brings us back to the Renaissance, which we've been kind of zigzagging back and forth on, as you can see throughout the lecture. We're all romanced by the Renaissance. And here you have a typeface that's based on Baskerville, back to Baskerville. Remember, Baskerville was being accused of making things too thin and, hurting people's eyes. And Mrs. Eves was named after John Baskerville's housekeeper, Sarah Eves, who also happened to be his mistress and his creative assistant. This was designed in 1996, again by Susanna Licco. She did those bitmap family. She also does this beautiful typeface 10 years later. So in 1985, she did the 8-bit, and now in 1996, she designs this. It became one of the most popular typeface of the late 20th century. And in an interview, Licco said that creating her own revival of the 18th century typeface Baskerville presented her with the opportunity to design some fanciful ligatures, which help her create visual interest and are reminiscent of customized lettering. So if you find yourself falling in love with ligatures, this is your typeface. You can see we have small caps, we have a beautiful italic, and there are ligatures. I don't know if this example has any ligatures showing, but they're in here. This typeface has them. So it's a super fun typeface to use. And if you want to play with ligatures, this is one to choose. This is the Roman and the italic. Notice how the italic feels very cursive, like calligraphic or cursive lettering. It's not just an angle. It's a different drawn letter. It's not angling the letters. It's totally different typeface. So it's really important to be aware of that. Here's another one. Fred Smear's Quadrant offered a crisp interpretation of typographic tradition. This is looking back at the 16th century point of view, and you can see it's a very decisively geometric serif. So here it is in Roman across the top. The middle is the small cap, and then the italic is to the far right. And here it is in Roman and italic. And then this typeface, Gotham, was designed in the year 2000. Anyone tell me what major movement projected this typeface to stardom, if you will? There's over 100 variations of this typeface. 100, over 100 fonts within the type family. What was this typeface used for that made it the typeface of the 2000s? Anyone recognize it? Nope, not Google. Nope, not TV. I'm going to give you a hint. The design came out of Chicago in
Is it
2008.
Is it just the Saturday Night Live thing, or is it the Obama thing?
It's Obama, exactly. Obama, the Obama campaign used Gotham for the 2008 campaign. And they went back to Tobias Farrer Jones and had them expand the typeface from like the 20 or so fonts they had into, I don't know, I think they did over 100 variations to manage all of the needs that the campaign had. So yeah, this became the typeface of the early aughts because of the Obama campaign and how successfully it was used and how successfully it was designed into the campaign. And lastly, this is it. We're looking at typefaces from our cars, right? And so Highway Gothic is what's been on the roads since we started driving. Right now, we're in the midst of having the oldest population we've ever had in the United States. We have more people over the age of 60 in the United States. The baby boomers are all retiring, and they are the biggest generation we've had to date become elderly. And what happens to our eyes when we get old? We don't see as well. We don't see as well. Our eyes get old. We need glasses the older we get. And at night, it gets even harder. So we are realizing that we need to address this because our signage isn't good. It was good for a while, but it's hard to read. It causes problems. But it's expensive to change all of the signs in the country. They don't want to make the signs bigger. That costs more money. We need to keep the signs the same size. So what has to happen is the typeface has to change. We have to look at the typeface and see what can we do to make it read better, see better. And so they came up with Clearview. Clearview has a much bigger X height. It has much more open counters so that we can really see it. It makes us not have to change the scale of the signs. It causes less visual clutter, and it absolutely helps drivers see where they're going and not miss their exit, not miss their turn, not miss the street they're looking for. So there's been a campaign to switch all of the signs to using the new typeface. It was it was not mandated, but recommended by the highway commissioner, and it's kind of gone through lots of ups and downs over the last 20 years. So I have an article about it. We might look at it a little later, but it is something to think of and be aware of, especially when we're designing things that have to be seen from cars. Obviously, going at a certain speed, we have to think about how we see type in every situation. All right. That's the end of this lecture. We're going to talk a little bit about typefaces and figure out what these old typefaces can teach us as we move into using them in modern and unique ways. All right. Thanks, everybody.